Thank you. Thank you for the kind introduction, and thank you for the kind invitation also to the German Biogas Association. My name is Sandra Rostek. I am head of the Berlin office of our organization and our policy department, which is also based in Berlin. I bear greetings from our CEO, Herr Claudius da Costa Gomez, who actually was invited and unfortunately couldn't make it, but I hope I can fill in. I actually do speak a little bit of Italian, but it's been 12 years that I haven't really used it. I used to study for 6 months in Torino, so maybe we can try that again during the lunch break, but bear with me if I chose the English version now. So this is the pointer. Okay, so allow me just a very short advertisement for the German Biogas Association, but then we're going to move right into the actual topic of today. So I want to talk some about biogas in the context of the German energy transition, and I think it will confirm a lot of what we've already heard about this morning, as in like we are also at a crossroads basically in Germany. We all know what to do, we just now have to do it, and somehow there's still a red light, especially for biogas, but we hope it will turn green very soon. And I'm going to highlight two aspects in specifics. It's biogas in the electricity sector and the role that we see for that, and also biomethane, which apparently is also a really big topic for you here in Italy. So the German Biogas Association has about 4,900 members, which consist both of plant operators mostly, but also very many companies from the entire value chain of biogas and biomethane. We have 40 employees dedicated exclusively to the topic, and as I said, we have many offices throughout the country, one in Bavaria where it all basically started, and one bigger one in Berlin, and some regional branches. And the main objective of all our colleagues and all our volunteers, obviously as here, is the promotion of the biogas sector through all means possible. So jumping right in, biogas and the German energy transition. I want to work with some pictures, some of like similar ones I've also seen on the screen this morning here. And if you look at those pictures, those are really from Germany. One would really think or believe that the German public is very much in favor of climate protection. So we've got the nuclear power no thanks sticker, which became very popular in the 90s, and they actually also became successful because we are getting rid of nuclear power as we speak, basically. So these are the years where we're already phasing out of nuclear power. Next up was coal, and that was a bigger battle to convince the public that we cannot cling to coal any longer in the long term. But there's also good news on that, which I will come back to later on. And maybe you've also heard about Fridays for Future. They're a big thing in Berlin. I see them almost every Friday when I'm in the office. Young people, children and youngsters are protesting and saying this is our planet, and the decisions you make now affect us, so please bear that in mind. So it's a really interesting phenomenon, and I can really feel that this is picking up. So Germany, are we really a country of climate protectors? One would really think so, because we also are very much in support of renewable energy, as the Renewable Energy Agency confirms and finds out yearly. They have a survey, and 95% of the German population support the further expanding of renewable energy. So they either find it very or extremely important, or at least important. So that is, to me, quite impressive, because as we know, this is quite a technical topic, but it can also be presented in such an emotional way that it touches the entire population. So yes, we have some new dynamics with the German energy transition, but also, unfortunately, I have to report that we still see some old barriers, I called it. So let's first look at the dynamics. The favorable public opinion is one aspect, but we also have very ambitious targets that speak for themselves, really. The government wants to reach a 65% renewable energy share in the electricity sector by 2030. That is a pretty ambitious goal. The coal compromise that has just been reached like a couple of weeks ago is a very, very big step towards a real energy transition, because there's going to be a coal phase out by 2038. Of course, some people would have wanted it to be even earlier, but I don't think that's the really important aspect in this debate. The more important is the fact that they actually did reach a compromise, and that is really a big, big step for the German government. Also, there's a draft for the new Climate Protection Act, and they claim to want, let's say, a GHG reduction in all relevant sectors of 95% by 2050. So that kind of picks up on what my predecessors were talking about, also on what needs to be done by the mid-century. The draft of this Climate Protection Act would actually follow through. But speaking of following through, that's exactly the problem here. What we see as barriers is probably something that you experience here as well. Not all the measures taken really are enough to really get the sectors going and to really get these dynamics in place. Also, most of what we're talking about is not really an energy transition, but it's at least only an electricity transition. What is really missing is a debate on the other sectors, on agriculture, on heating, on the mobility sector. And as long as we don't tackle those, we're never going to really get into the right direction. Also, the government is very reluctant to introduce unpopular measures. That is, of course, understandable, but it's a big barrier for us, apparently. And last but not least, we have a very restrictive, incoherent biomass policy in Germany, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit more now. But first, let's remind ourselves that bioenergy plays a very major role in all sectors in Germany today. So we account for about 30% in the electricity sector of all renewable sources that play a role there, and about 90% in the heating sector, and also 90% in the transport sector. So we are really the main actor there in overall sectors. However, unfortunately, we are treated like the stepchild by policy. And I'm going to skip this to focus on more interesting aspects and save some time. And I want to get to the new role that we see for biogas and a high demand that we also see there in the electricity sector in Germany. We now have about 38% of renewable energy sources in the system already. As I said, we want to get to 65 by 2030. And I guess it's also no news for you that the other renewable energy sources have been experiencing a very fast, positive development also, and have become very, very cheap also in the last years. So for us, with biogas and biomass models, that means that we need to find a new role and need to find a new way of playing out our strengths and advantages in the electricity system. And this new role is to give flexibility to the system instead of baseload. So the more fluctuating sources come into the system, the more important it's going to get to kind of be the backbone of the system. So, well, we have the saying that we always use. We're not the system. We're not the window of the energy transition, but we're part of the frame. And without the frame, there is no window. So, you're going to need us for the time being. Results are starting to show, actually. While the number of plants stays constant for now, the installed electric capacity, however, is growing. So people are investing in gas storage unions and to really start getting ready for more price spreads also in the electricity market, and then kick in when it's needed most, and even in 2050 there's probably going to be let's say wind-free, very still, calm, but very cold winter nights when there is no sun, no wind. Then is really going to be the time for biogas, and then you also can make probably a very lot of money out of it. However, and now I come back to the barriers. The Renewable Energy Sources Act, which is our main system of incentivization in the electricity sector for renewables, has been stalling biogas ever since 2014. As you can see here in this statistics, we had very, very growth years, very much growth years from 2009 to 2011. And then there has been some remodeling of the law already in 2012, and ever since 2014, not really much has been happening in the German biogas sector. And it's even worse because we're actually lacking a mid to long-term perspective right now. So the Renewable Energy Sources Act, we managed to get plants to participate in the national tender processes. So the existing plants, which are running out of the incentivization for the first 20 years, can re-tender basically and put in another quotation and get another 10 years of funding. But the growth path for these auctions has not been decided on. So only until 2020 we know what's going to happen. And after that, we don't know. And if we don't get an idea, what's going to happen looks like this. So, like this slide, because by 2030, when it's actually most needed, because we want to be at 65%, and remember we're like a third of that, we would be gone. So this is, I think, a very impressive way of showing how incoherent, unfortunately, German policies in biomass currently is, and how big our challenge that we're facing right now is. I want to just very quickly highlight one other aspect. Biomethane, we want to green Germany's gas grids and, of course, also the streets. And I apologize for this slide being in German, but it's from a study that was published only like a couple of days ago. Actually, by probably my predecessors were also kind of probably involved in that, yeah, and it confirms of basically what you were saying, or with a focus here on Germany and of the amazing potentials that green gases could have. And in Germany, that means that green gases domestically produced green gases could cover half of Germany's 2050 gas demand. So here we are really looking at a major role again that we should play in this sector, and that we, of course, are setting out also to tackle. Here again, let's look at some achievements and barriers in Germany for biomethane. We have about 200 biomethane plants, but of course these are still niche markets in relation to the other, first biogas, of course, but also other renewable energy sources. And why is that? Because there are many barriers who hinder us still in the various sectors of biomethane. The main focus area for now is also the CHP sector. And here the main incentivization instrument is, again, the Renewable Energy Sources Act, which I already said is lacking any incentives for biomass right now. Also, the heat market, unfortunately, heating applications are hardly supported. Like, we also have to be, there's an obligation to be used in CHP plants also because, yes, there is a higher CO2 reduction, but these applications then are hardly ever there, basically, in praxis, so there is no real application for biomethane in this case then. The fuel sector obviously would be the best and highest sector for biomethane applications to get into place. However, stagnating CNG vehicle sales hinder us there, and also the national biomethane quota is far below what the RED II suggests for all over Europe, and I don't see any signs for that the national government is going to raise this quota anytime soon, unfortunately. Also, we would like to see more international trade, but there is a lot of prohibitive national legislation on that. And also, as of right now, there is a lack of an EU-wide mass balance system, which, however, I think we're tackling altogether, also together with the European Biogas Association, and that shouldn't be a problem anymore anytime soon. So I'm coming to conclusions. The news I bear, I guess, aren't so positive, unfortunately, because the German government is pretty incoherent in its current energy and climate strategy. We have, as we've seen, very ambitious goals which are really in line with anything that has been decided on in Paris. And all these goals, if you really want to fulfill them, can only be reached with bioenergy. There is no way around it, even if you don't want it. But we just don't see any following through. And 2030 is just around the corner, and yet we have very restrictive policies, especially for biomass. Obviously, our sector suffers greatly from this lack of perspective and planability. And we really are having a hard time keeping them motivated, to really hang in there and follow us, again, on this very hard road. We now focus on the stabilization of our existing plants, because this is really also a big mass that we already have. And if we just manage to optimize those first, that would be the first step. And then we can talk again about growing and expanding. We have achieved options for existing plants, so that was the first step, and that was a major, big achievement for us. But many of the conditions yet need to be improved in order to actually really work. And it is also clear that in the long run, probably the Renewable Energy Sources Act is not going to be the ideal means of incentivization for biogas, because we have so many virtues and advantages of what we do that go far beyond just the electricity sector. So it is not really, it doesn't seem sensible to fund everything just by means of electricity funding, But in lack of another means, we still cling to it, obviously. But our vision is that all the
why do you think that Germany preferred to focus on electricity? We have a similar problem here in Italy. I think most of the effort was about the electricity. But why in Germany do you have an answer? And I wanted to make you another question. If you think that this field of the biogas we need, let me say, incentive forever, or it's just a time lapse where agriculture will need the incentives. Because here in Italy we are reflecting about all these side effects like carbon sink and so on, and maybe because agriculture produces this kind of good externality, let me say, we should incentive this, or it could be a good idea to incentive it also on the long term, which is different for other sources of renewable energy. So what do you think about this? The two questions.
Yes. Okay, so why did we start in the electricity sector? Maybe that first, or why don't we move to the other sectors? I can only suspect. I think it's harder really to tackle the mobility sector and the heat market for politicians, because those are closer to the people. It's not as emotional a topic of what source my electricity comes from. It may be emotional when it shows on your invoice, but it's not as close to you as if the government tells you what car to drive, or that you have to renovate your house in a certain way and install a biomass application or solar thermal pump or whatever. I think it's because of that the electricity sector was tackled first. It's just easier in a way.
And about the incentives?
Yes, the incentives, actually, I think my last...
okay. Perfect.
slide might answer that, because that's how we see the future of biogas. It's, as I said, it's a puzzle, but it's not only puzzling in a confusing way, but it's also a puzzle that is worth and ready to be solved. And we think that the incentives in the future have to come from from all the advantages that biogas has, basically biogas and biomethane. That doesn't make it easier for the plant operators. One must really admit that. But I think it's going to be the reality that you will not get the incentives from just one source, but that you will have very individual business models, and the different plants that we have, the different sources that biogas comes from. That all plays a role, and everybody has to find their own niche. If you want to do biomethane and go to the fuel sector,
a differentiation you see in the future.
More and the flexibility, and then all in all, I think we're going to solve that puzzle. So yeah, that's it for now.
Thank you
for your attention.